We know we did some greenhouse gas measuring in the Maglu project as well. So I did know that we did experimental removal. And from that, I was suspicious we probably find a loss in soil carbon stock compared to the bioenergy crop of removing, because you are basically ploughing up the whole field. Although that was that's not significant in a lot of the cases. The large loss in that one site was a bit surprising. I should have said that crop was it wasn't in the ground for the full 15 years. It had been removed early. So that might be one of the reasons we saw that. In that case, it didn't have time to even start to recover before the crop was taken back out again. So.
And previous crops on the arable land was
mix on all of them. So majority of them would be row crops, so things like wheat and barley, bit of oilseed rape. They often rotate in the UK with an occasional fallow in there when we still had set aside rules way back. But yeah, row crop, but mainly ploughed row crop.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting results. I think that's crucial to know much more about that. Yeah. Yes, Serena. Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Serena Ahlgren from the Research Institute of Sweden. I was thinking the soil carbon is very related to the productivity of the crop. So if you could say something about how this, where you took the soil samples, where these crops, how they were managed, were they well managed, fertilized, and something about the yield. Okay. And also, if you, based on your results, can give some recommendations to the farmers if they want to increase their soil carbon with these crops, how would they do it?
Okay. So in terms of the management of the crops, the Elam project, both these crops, all the crops, we don't take crops for this sort of sampling if they're not relatively well managed. I'm not going to go and get a crop that's half dead. I've rejected crops for that very reason, because we're looking for crops that are relatively well managed. In the UK, the management of these crops is still relative, because they're low input, so the farmers still looking at the low, so they're not maximising yield, they're maximising yield for input. So for a degree, but all of them would be yielding. So in the Elam project, the yields from Miscanthus were all around 11 tonnes per hectare, which is pretty good for those crops. Some of them were topping out. The willow ranged more from everything from sort of, I think the lowest I got was a 6 and the highest I got was a 10, but they varied again depending on, but then the problem with the willow is it varies much more because you're doing every 3 years and you get all sorts of random things that happen in those 3 years in terms of weather and climate. In terms of maximising their soil carbon, it's again keeping the crop in the ground for as long as you can. If you are planning to replant, probably going down a disking version rather than removal. Managing the removal process, and then everything else basically boils down to what you'd normally do in every other agricultural field. Minimizing any outtake that you don't need to do, so you're making sure you're not disturbing the soil as minimally as possible when you're doing things like harvesting. If you are removing the crop, I think that's what we're going to look at next, is minimum till removal. Minimum till planting we've also looked at in these crops. So it's the same thing as you're bringing in from agricultural practices.
More questions? I just wonder the willingness to grow willow with Miscanthus.
Yep.
How the farmers, how do they?
At the moment, you probably can sort of describe the farmers that are taking these crops up at the moment as farmers who are those people that are most likely to try something new. So they're the innovators. That doesn't necessarily mean they're the youngest or the biggest farmers. They just tend to be people who are like, I think our farmers, I've noticed, are not, considering how risky farming is, farmers aren't actually that risk averse. All they're looking for is some degree of certainty. It will be those farmers. The issue we're going to start to get as we try and get closer to that 1 million hectare, those really large numbers, is you're then going to start getting into farmers who are much more, I'm a farmer, I want to farm, I don't want to grow trees, or I don't want to grow. There's this thing about there's a group of farmers who are willing to diversify, and then which is what we generally are getting now. And with the right information, the right support, and that's mainly coming from industry. So Terravesta and Iggesund. So Iggesund is a paper mill plant. Terravesta is a company that was set up by a farmer to supply Miscanthus for bedding and for energy. Those two at the moment are where the majority of the planting are going in, and they offer a good environment, a good economic package and support to the farmers. But as we get bigger, we need more companies. Then it will come down to much more the economics and also the information we're able to provide them. And it's going to get tougher as we get closer to the larger numbers. At the moment, there's still capacity to expand, and there is expansion happening.
Okay. No more questions? Okay, thank you so much. Here you have some Swedish